Hello there, YouTube. This is Siddles and Bits back at it again. Today we're going over the recent update and spoilers for Back for Blood. Namely, we just recently had it announced that August 30th is the date for the new DLC or expansion for the game called Children of the Worm. I'm not really going to go into a lot of details here, just basically glancing over this and going over the spoilers that were teased prior. I was holding back on them because I was hoping that we would get a lot more, but then they sort of like stopped. Then we got this announcement. So there'll be 6 cards that we'll be going over and just briefly talking about all this stuff and how I feel about them in particular. First off, new DLC is always good. I don't have a close-up of all these skins, but they all look good. It doesn't look like they have one of all the cleaners here, but that might just be, the amount of space that Art had available. Um, Not really going to talk about much of those. Not really going to talk much about the gun skins. Not really going to talk about new weapons accessories because, mainly because new weapons, like, it's obvious here that the Lockjaw is it's a sniper rifle. The only implication that I can think about there is it only in Act 5, or is it technically in the main spawn pool? Because if it's in the main spawn pool, then anybody who uses burn cards, like Dusty's sniper, you're potentially going to have another role to worry about if you're the type of person who wants a specific, like, sniper in general. Most people are do that. They want like the Phoenix or the Barrett. So they're running on like a 2 out of 3 chance they might get the M1A, but most times you're going to do just fine. Now you have the Lockjaw in there. So depending on how that looks statistically, that may or may not be another miss. Or it may be the one that you won, and now you're going for a 1 for 4 because you don't like the Barrett anymore. Lockjaw's the best sniper in the game. Who knows? Same thing with accessories. It's it's difficult to like judge that stuff because we don't know like what slots they're in. Again, do they spawn in base game? Because one of them that was teased was the bile jar, and it looks like this enemy here has bile jars, which is a little odd. But and also the lockjaw is on this enemy right here, so we don't exactly know how any of that stuff works. And even though they gave like little brief descriptions, like say the bile jar, attracts enemies to attack the target. Like, that's all well and good, but mechanically speaking, we don't know anything, so it's really hard to judge any of this stuff. We've got a new campaign, which is always great. Everybody's been wanting new maps for probably like 6 months at least, and it's 6 maps long, as we can see with these little dots here. A lot of people are remiss about that, but I don't think that that's necessarily like a big deal at all. If Because one of the things that I never really got about the people like always wanting like new story, new story. I understand that there's like lore in the game, and getting more voice acting, more lore is always good. But as soon as you guys play this thing for like 30 runs, you're going to be asking for more. So that kind of stuff isn't really important to me. And in the last DLC, Tunnels of Terror, we got 6.5 maps. Half meaning, the inner hive. No matter how you slice it, you can't call that a full map. Not saying that that's saying that to be rude to like obviously the development team, the map design team, but it's not a full map. It's more like a finale, like diner or something. But it released 6 maps, and if you think about it, like all those maps are pretty freaking long, right? Like they're probably some of them are the longest, like largest maps in the game, and they're very varied and such like that. So a new act releasing with only 6 maps doesn't really concern me because of the fact that last update we got quite a bit of map content. And so this could potentially, like, theoretically speaking, this could be one of the largest acts in the game, but probably not, right? The main thing that I could see about having 6 maps is obviously you get less room for upgrades, and what else would there be? You're technically getting less value out of things that occur in safe rooms, right? Like share the wealth. If you have less upgrades though, you're probably still going to stack for share the wealth for a an upgrade on map 1 if that's how you play, because you're going to be fundamentally weaker here. And then the question also is how's the scaling occurring, right? Are we cutting off from the front like we do in like Act 3? So, you start with enemies that are stronger? Or is it supposed to be like a quicker little campaign and they cut off the back and we're not really going to see monstrous enemies? Or maybe they just do like, since the map is so long, it has different spawning rules like hives, so then you're expected to scale harder in them. Again, we really don't know, but I wouldn't be concerned about 6 maps here. It's more about the implication of exactly how that affects this campaign's specific balance, which we have different balance really in other campaigns anyways. It'll just be a new experience. I'm honestly hoping that it is like a nice short experience because it'll give me more opportunities where I have time to actually like play matches. New enemies, like I could go into theory crafting here, but again, we know absolutely nothing about these. Do they only spawn in Act 5? So going on to Prophet Dan, obviously it's one character as opposed to two, but then again, like you got all this voice acting work with new campaign stories. Characters have to call out new items. They have to call out new enemies. Enemies themselves also have like a lot of work, right? Like this isn't technically just like a reskin of a Ripper or a Tall Boy that does fundamentally different things. Like this is its own entity, and when you consider how enemies themselves act in the game, these could also have their own AI. And considering, again, that we have a sniper, some sort of like I'm whatever the frick this guy is, somebody with a bow, and obviously like a bruiser melee guy. Um, each of these individually are probably going to have their own AI, and we just don't know how exactly we're going to be able to interact with them. I could also see, right? So, like, we've got Act 5, we've got these enemies, shorter Act 5. Like, how do these guys spawn? Do they spawn naturally in Act 5? So you're dealing with, like, more enemies, so it's kind of like Candyman 24/7? Again, we don't really know anything about all this stuff, so it's kind of hard to, like, talk about that, but just to throw some ideas out there for you guys to think about. Anyways, back to Prophet Dan, my apologies. They haven't really said anything that I know of. All we really have to go off of is the fact that he is called Prophet, and he's got like this. I hope it's called like a biblical verse or something like that. I'm sorry, I am not religious or like follow the Bible at all, but I do know what this means. And somebody on the subreddit like posted what it is, but basically it pretty much is just giving me the impression that he is religious, which makes sense because he's called the prophet. It probably has like significance, but again, I'm not really going to dive into that. He's Irish with the flag and the shamrock, which is more like a character thing. I don't think that's really like plot or mechanical important. I would hope not. I don't know how that would even work. But people have noted that this is a new gun. I believe somebody said it was a AK-12. That could obviously be a new weapon, which is exciting. I like it's kind of funny. The more weapons they put in the game, the less likely you are to get the weapon that you want, but that actually makes me happy as opposed to like other people who are going to be not so happy. But yeah, that's just typical bits, right? Another thing to note is that he's got this card here. I don't know what the significance is of the King of Spades, which is my quality is probably terrible. It is the King of Spades, not the Ace of Spades, which generally you hear Ace of Spades. I don't know the significance of King of Spades, but maybe one of you guys do, and you could leave that down in the comments below. I'm sure that this is all like character stuff, but just to theory craft a little bit, which I generally don't do, he's called the Prophet, and we data mined, or we, the data miner on the Discord, uh, data mined a lot of lines from the game that were put in recently. So theoretically, for this update, also people were able to like not necessarily data mine, but they got the achievement list of the new map names from Steam. And the new map names, in order, are called Light Guide Us to the Den of Evil, where me flocks chained in the depths, surrounded by devils awaiting our justice. He's got the biblical verse. He's also called the prophet. One of the data mined lines is literally Dan saying, "That's probably more of me flock." So it looks like Dan's actually as plot important as you can be in a 6 map campaign act. He's plot important, it seems, because there's just too many connections here. Some people have suggested that, he's part of this cult that defected, so he's able to have like some sort of like anti-ridden sort of like some people have said stealth. Some people have said like damage versus mutations, less aggro. Besides all that, the way I see it, he's called the prophet. He's used to leading people. He has a flock. So the way I see it is that he's used to being a leader. And one of the things that I personally have always wanted in the game, so I'm going to project it right now, is the ability for. We got lots of buffs in the game, and they're pretty much like hard coded, like they're going to do what they do, right? Like sometimes you can cheese them, but for the most part, they're mechanically stringent. I've always wanted a character or like a card or an archetype that's able to improve the intensity of buffs or extend their duration. And to me, this looks like a character that could possibly do that. So, like stuff like giving people like poultice lasts longer on you, so you get more healing, or poultice is more like effective, so you get more healing. Now all of a sudden, True Grit's going up in value. You got stuff like on your mark is getting better. Stuff like dare I say sadistic or in the zone, the precision kill like cards. If they last longer, you're able to stack more up, or if they're just better buffs, all of a sudden you're able to get more mileage out of them. And it's a scaling that isn't currently in the game, but I could see it fitting in the game, right? Anyway, I'm going to stop theory crafting about this stuff and instead start theory crafting about what I wanted to theory craft, which is the cards that they have teased. They have teased 6 cards. We're going to start with these. First off, we're going to start out with Out with a Bang because that's probably one of the most simplest ones to think about. So, Out with a Bang gives you an extra life and a team effect that whenever a teammate is incapacitated or dies, they drop a active pipe bomb. So, immediately, this looks like a bit of a meme, but I'm not entirely convinced that it is. So, +1 extra life with a team effect. So, this is basically in competition with life insurance. But what life insurance does is give you 15% stacking and cap trauma resistance, which, if you have an extra life, you obviously want. Some people actually are willing to take 4 copies of life insurance, pretty much almost completely negate in cap trauma, especially on the higher difficulties. And that's their way of dealing with the fact that, okay, instead of having someone take a 10% life hit and taking needs, we're going to take essentially 2 extra cards to solve the same problem, and it'll make trauma a little bit easier to deal with. That obviously depends on your team, but so with this. But a lot of people at the top end, or at least I've been doing a lot of experiments with people who are looking into it now, is Heng obviously gives items when he takes damage, and it's very powerful. But when you get incapped, you still have 400 HP that you're able to leverage to spawn more items. And the thing is that if you're planning on going down, I personally don't think that that's necessary. Just get good THP generation because then it's free items, but that's significantly more different in No Hope. You can instead make it so that you drop a pipe bomb and clear out all the commons. Now, obviously, that doesn't really help them as far as like generating items, but it does make you more likely to survive. So, the other thing that could happen is possibly some difficult maps. You may purposefully sacrifice somebody to draw enemies away with the pipe bomb and you know, take the aggro off so that everybody can run. And that sort of hinges on the idea of what do we not know is this your pipe bomb? And as such, is it the rarity of your team's pipe bombs? Because if you drop a purple pipe bomb, that's 10 seconds of no commons, and that can allow people to move either a great distance or it can allow them to focus on specials only. I could seriously see this being pretty powerful, even in like a casual, like not actively trying to proc it setting. If it's upgrading with rarity and it's your pipe bombs, it could scale with your accessory damage. It could scale with bomb squad. Now suddenly, you could do sort of like kind of the same deal. It's pretty janky, admittedly. You could put yourself in a door, have someone down you, you drop a pipe bomb, and you time that so that I don't know, an enemy like a special comes up and then you blow them up with a pipe bomb. Meanwhile, you got Inspiring Sacrifice popping off, and all those people behind you are just drilling a boss. Now, why wouldn't you just use a flashbang bits? Absolutely, but having more options is always better in my opinion, even if they're not optimal. But a lot of mechanics around here that might affect how good Out with a Bang is. Another question is how does it stack? Do you drop 4 pipe bombs if everybody has this? Because that could be a lot of damage. I don't know. Anyways, going over here to Expire T5. And this is one of the reasons why I get very excited about these expansions, is because it seems every expansion we get new technology like added into the game, like as far as like mechanical technology, not necessarily well, and then also like player technology, because and it's a bunch of stuff that you don't really think about, like how extraordinary it is because it just works as it's supposed to and it makes sense and it seems very simple when somebody explains it to you. But like last patch, we got Stealthy Passage, which was the ability to bind an action to a key. Of course, that action was able to do a number of things. Bodyguard, right? The ability for you to redirect damage is very impressive. The you got Sadist and the card whose name I will not name, which is okay, how much damage is this person taking? I'm going to gain benefits from that, which is fundamentally different from, say, True Grit, which is I'm taking damage, let me activate a benefit. And of course, that and Defensive Maneuver was I took this much damage, place this buff, which is entirely different than, oh, this person took this much damage, calculate final damage, and then give me an amount. So they're definitely using these DLCs to add a lot of new technology in the game, and it seems like being able to drop free items that are actually active and disabling support slots to actually put like abilities in there is sort of what we're going for now. Now, Expired T5 is activate your support slot to create a 10-meter area that damages enemies, specifically calls out enemies, for 8 damage per second as fire damage to weak spots. Now, they did specifically call out enemies, and I do want to point that out because one little fun thing is that barrels are actually considered allies. So you will not set off barrels, meaning the oil barrels. Propane tanks, who the hell knows? You'll probably blow yourself up with propane tanks and gas canisters. But you don't have to worry about blowing yourself up with a barrel or like popping a barrel when you don't want to. Theoretically speaking, again, as the card is written, that's what I'm seeing here. And then, of course, this 10-meter area deals 8 damage per second as fire damage to weak spots. It specifically calls out weak spots, and that seems pretty significant. And then, of course, it costs 40 assault rifle ammo is what that is there. So, you know what? I also noticed that it doesn't really state a duration on here. That's interesting. I would assume that you only get one of these, though. We'll talk about that in the other cards down below. But it disables your support slot. Now, as with Ammo Mule way back, Disabling your support slot is very significant because even if you're not a medic, being able to carry more meds could potentially be incredibly good. So the idea of getting rid of your support slot means that it has to be good enough to remove that support slot. And one of the main things that I tell like newer players is you need damage on medics because if you can kill the enemy, you don't necessarily need to heal your allies. And as such, like even as a medic, you should be prioritizing like offensives over medical to an extent. Now, would this be able to negate the need for support slot? Honestly, I think that it could because we're hitting the weak spot. Let's assume that this does hit the weak spot, therefore we get the enemy's weak spot multiplier. And let's just start looking at commons, right? 20 HP up to 30 HP. We're going to have to ignore Festering because they have a crap ton of HP. We're going to have to ignore Armored Commons because they have the helmet, but of course as soon as you get rid of the helmet, then this will apply. We're going to have to ignore Charred Ridden because they don't take fire damage. They're completely immune. If you're dealing 8 damage to a common's weak spot, you are now dealing 16 damage because they take times 2 damage. This isn't even factoring our weak spot damage. I'm going to get into that. So, we're dealing 16 damage. All we need is a little bit more damage of any sort, and all of a sudden we can kill like normal commons, which seems good. Being immune to normal commons is incredibly good, especially in pubs where everybody, for whatever reason, like neglects them, and a lot of bad damage occurs because of commons. Another thing is that it's stated as fire damage. So let's just go one step further and say that we have pyro for whatever freaking reason, right? So we're in a 10-meter radius. We're in the front line, basically. Like, not necessarily. 10 meters is actually a large radius. And we're killing enemies with fire damage now. Most specifically, we're dealing 32 fire damage per second, which is enough to kill Monstrous now. I believe once you start getting up into upper difficulties, that's not going to be enough, so you're going to have some damage, right? But if this is fire damage, the question comes is, okay, does that scale with accessory damage? Or you'd probably just put glass cannon on at this point because theoretically speaking, commons aren't going to touch you. Anyways, I'm digressing a lot. So we're dealing 32 fire damage per second to the weak spot, which will pretty much kill any monstrous common that comes within 10 meters of you. Obviously, if there's blitzing, you might have a problem because you got server desync at this point. And another thing to point out here is that you also have volatiles. If volatiles are on the map, they're also kind of going to like pinch you a bit because, again, that server desync. I believe the damage radius of volatiles are like somewhere between 5 to 7.5 meters. Someone can feel free to correct me down in the comments below, but it's much larger than you would think. So you have like say a 2.5 meter leeway for an enemy to get to you. And mathematically speaking, that seems like it's definitely going to happen, except it only procs once every second. So there's room for them to walk in. And again, server desync. So it would be very easy for an enemy to run into your radius and get far enough in to actually hit you with the volatile explosion, which now has no drop off and has a very chunky like trauma damage modifier. Now again, if you have pyro, you generally don't care because all of these fire kills are theoretically going to give you THP and you're running around the map like I'm legitimately scared of this card. I think that it is worth the support slot. Even if you're just playing like some sort of front line and like crouched up front as like say melee, then you can actually like spec into like special damage because this is going to take care of the commons for the most part. You're going to have to worry about or your team, which is generally the case anyways, is going to have to take care of Charred Ridden for you. They're going to have to take care of Armored Ridden for you, or at least pop off the helmet, and they're going to have to help you with Festering. But honestly, it's going to start looking pretty good once you start adding like some damage multipliers in there. Another thing to note is that we're hitting weak spot. Does Jim get stacks from this? Probably not, because again, our data miner found out that what actually happens is Molotovs or fire will hit commons in their weak spot. So it's already doing that, and we already don't get stacks from Molotovs on Jim. And it also explains why volatiles explode when they walk through fire. And it also explains why if you pop off the helmets, armored commons just freaking die to fire, like pretty easily. So I don't think that it's going to have an interaction with Jim, except for the fact that obviously if you are not taking damage and enemies are coming at you, and how am I trying to explain this? If you're not taking damage because commons can't get to you and you're keeping your stacks up, I would think that theoretically Gym stacks are going to apply to this. And now instead of dealing 32 damage, you're now dealing 40 damage. And this starts to get ridiculous. Possibly also even add glass cannon in there. Now you're doing 50 damage per second to the weak spot. This is definitely a card to look after, in my opinion. AI Assistant Module. So this is another activation card. This one costs sniper ammo. Oh, another thing to note is that going back to here, if you are using this as a melee, you might think that, oh, I already, again, take care of commons just fine. Why would I do this? Well, what are you doing with this this assault rifle ammo, I would say. So then you just go full stumble on specials and special DPS, and this takes care of your commons for you. Again, we don't know the duration and all that, so that might have something to do with it, but it's something for you to consider. Otherwise, I think honestly the main balancing factor for T5 is the fact that assault rifles are so prominent that you're probably going to have to invest in this. This isn't free. I, it sounds like a no-brainer, but you got you got the ranch rifle believers, you got people who love using LMGs. Generally, when you go into pubs, you've got like 3 people running around with ARs, and ammo's always tight. So if that's the case, like you can't really get away with expired T5, but you also might argue that if you're solving however many commons might show up, right, with 40 assault rifle ammo, so long as this kills around 40 enemies, that's worth it there, and then the rest of your ammo goes into specials. Sorry, going back to AI Assistant Module, this one's using sniper ammo, which is much less contested, especially now that the Magnum's been reworked and not a lot of people necessarily are using the Deagle. And unless you're using the M1A or the Witness, well, you don't really use a lot of sniper ammo. Like most snipers generally don't need to ask for ammo in my experience, because they just don't use a lot. They just kill things in 2 to 3 hits, and okay, you can kill 50 enemies in a map. You use your sidearm for everything else. So this one seems a little bit more free. The problem is that it disables the quick slot, which is a very competitive slot, because that's where your toolkits come from, it's where your defibs come from, it's where wire comes from. A lot of people are going to meme on me for this one, but it's also where your stun guns are, it's also where your ammo crates are. And in a expansion where we are using ammo for effects that may not necessarily be quite worth the ammo count that they cost, like say on expired T5, I think that ammo crates are going to start to become much more prominent, because otherwise you're going to have to invest more in your deck, your starting deck for ammo, or buy more team ammo upgrades. And so I think ammo crates are going to go up in value this patch. But anyways, activate your quick slot to gain 5% reuse chance for your accessories. This is basically Hang Aura for 15 Sniper, which is pretty good. I'd say that it's actually quite powerful depending on the situation, and I'll explain some of those. And then, of course, reuse chance increases by 10% until successful. And this is where we start to get into like a little, but it's a huge bunch of math that I'm probably not going to bother you guys with, but I will talk about it loosely. So it may seem weird that all of a sudden we have a pity rate in Back for Blood, but our data miner was able to find out that in actuality, Pinata has a pity rate as well. Of course, Pinata is 15% chance to drop an item, and then anytime that you don't drop an item, it increases by 1%. Increasing 15 by 1%, it's fundamentally like, sorry, it's useless, right? It's basically there to make sure that for whatever reason, you don't get the unluckiest campaign ever, which is statistically like never going to happen. AI Assistant module goes up by 10. 10 reuse chance is significant. So basically, you spend 15 sniper ammo, you are now an extra hang, even if there's hang on the team. And if you miss your first reuse, now you get an extra Magician's Apprentice, even if you have Magician's Apprentice. The effect is removed while damage is taken, but that's actually not, it's not as big of a deal. Reuse chance is one of those things that a lot of people think about it linearly, right? They're like, oh, okay, so purple bandages have 20 reuse chance, so with this I now have 25, so I get 5% more items. In actuality, you don't, because what you're really doing is you're going from an 80% chance of spending that item to a 75% chance to spend that item. So the closer you get to 100%, the more economic, what would be the right equity? I don't think equity is the right word, but the more economic value you're going to be getting out of your items. So items that generally have high reuse chance benefit the most from having a reuse chance, despite the fact that you might be like, oh, well, it's just another 1 out of 10 chance for me to get an extra toolkit reuse on an FAC. That's, first off, that's incredible value. Secondly, it's a lot better than 10%, because you're going from 55% down to 45%, which is almost 20% more toolkits. Which, going back to my point, this disables the quick slots, so obviously it doesn't really help them out. And quick slots are generally the ones that get the reuse chance. So they pretty much pre-balance this motherfucker. But you think about it though, you have two cases where I see that this is especially useful. First off, obviously medics. I could see this being competitive with support scav, in the sense that once you get up to a higher med rarity, obviously you're giving more pills, so you can crazy pills much better. You're getting more med kits, so you're saving a lot of money there, healing more trauma, and most importantly, your bandages in our discussion with scav, right? So bandages get up to 20%. This would be 25%. Let's say that you also have Magician's Apprentice, so you're at 35%. You have Hang on Team, you now have 40%. If you're using Field Surgeon, I'm serious. Don't meme on me about it. If you're using Field Surgeon, you are now able to theoretically, with a 40% reuse chance, heal as much as you would with a med kit, especially if you also have medical expert in there. Or you're just trying to get as much field surgeon procs as possible. This could keep your team healed up very well. And all it costs you is 15 sniper ammo, which is generally uncontested. You find an extra bandage or an extra pill, and you just keep freaking popping somebody, right? So I'm not really even looking at like the healing. I'm looking at effects like, again, field surgeon. This allows you to extend EMT, but generally that's not what you're looking for. In safe rooms, when you're transitioning and you decide to just bankroll trauma, you just go ahead, you pop this, you're not going to take damage, and you may theoretically save some money on medkits healing people's trauma. Now, you could argue that if that's what you're actually going for, having a 20% reuse on medkits, you'd almost be better off just like having economy and just making sure that you have that. Potentially. The other thing that I could see this being very good in is a Grenadier style build. So If your job is to solve problems with grenades, you can have a 20% reuse chance on frags. If for whatever reason you aren't using highwaymen or something happens to highwaymen in this patch, right? If you're playing pyro, you can get more Molotovs. I don't think that this one is going to be as powerful as necessarily, say, expired T5, but I think that it's incredibly usable and it's going to be niche. Someone out there in the community is going to find a good spot for it, and they're going to probably be able to make this feel relatively good. And I think this is going to create sort of like a sub build type, again, kind of like comparable to, like, say, Scavdoc, but I don't think that this is going to be like huge unless something breaks, right? It does seem pretty well balanced. Here on the left, Crippling Frequency. This is another card that honestly scares the living shit out of me. Um, the reason behind that is a lot of people are going to be against this due to the disables offensive slot. It also costs 30 SMG ammo, which, depending on your lineup, may not even be like something that you contest, right? If everybody's using ARs, SMGs, snipers, you got, like, say, an infinite Tech 9 or something like that going on, or like an infinite Belgian, you could potentially not even be using this ammo. So it's niche, but I think that the activation cost is not necessarily like a bad thing. What it does, you activate your offensive slot to emit a pulse that reduces damage taken by enemies within 25 meters by 2 for each active application for 7 seconds. So it says for each active application, and that's disgusting. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about the game is that damage reduction like this, not damage resistance, occurs after damage resistance in the formula, which makes it incredibly powerful. However, we only really have two sources of it. We have scar tissue, and we have pep talk. So, like, okay, we've got 4 damage reduction. Like, what exactly are you really going to be able to reduce that with that at the top end? I don't know. Acid. Actually, scar tissue reduces acid by 50%. You got a little bit more DR. And then you got pep talk. You're able to revive somebody in acid. And now you're done reviving in acid and everybody's in acid. It's very niche right now. And I would even say, God forbid, you guys know I don't like saying this. It's incredibly janky and dead. It's not really something that you really abuse, but scar tissue is very good. However, now we're able to stack this. We don't know how much we're able to stack this. So it does not say an upper limit like Film Full of Lead does. Film Full of Lead says max count of buffs is 20. So it's telling you you can only have this much. They don't say that with Crippling Frequency. It could be the amount of space that they have on the card, right? Again, mechanically we can only assume that this works as written. But other things to note, does it have an internal cooldown? Are you able to, like, spam this as fast as you possibly can and get like a I don't know, like 16 stacks in 7 seconds? You could probably spam faster than that, but you are, of course, hampered by the fact that it costs ammo. If you're able to get up to 16, though, like, okay, let's get a bit more realistic. Let's say that there's an internal cooldown of 1 second on this. So you're able to theoretically get up to, what would it be? I'm going to just say 6, right? So we can reduce damage by 12. And again, this is after damage resistance. So anything that deals less than 12 damage, we can block. So we're starting to look at, I don't know, breaker swarms, right? Their base damage is 5. So with a little bit of damage resistance, you would be able to tank a no-hope breaker, theoretically speaking, as long as, again, you have access to ammo. Another thing that a lot of people don't know about this game is that I don't know if it's always been like this, but it at least was noticed after the DLC 1 updates, because I'm sure that they needed to do it for the sake of the balance of those things there, is when you do take no damage, most notably with Bodyguard, most notably with Charisse plates, Charisse armor plates, you A, don't take any trauma. B, you don't take any on-hit effects. And C, it just doesn't count as damage. So most notably, you keep your gym stacks and you keep run like hell. That's significant. Like, you don't get festering stacks. You don't get gunked. You don't. Like, I'm starting to wonder if with this, I don't think that it's the case, but would you be able to avoid being pinned? Now, technically, that would mean that a bodyguard would prevent someone from being pinned, and it doesn't. So I don't think that's the case, but it could be mechanically different, or, they could make an addition to it. As long as you're able to reduce the damage to 0 through damage reduction, it, it seems like the entire order of operations just gets deleted, right? You don't take trauma, all that stuff. However, for taking a hit, you still do get a general slowdown. So keep that in mind. But otherwise, if this can get stacked to an amount to where, again, like expired T5, you no longer have to worry about commons, I could see this being worth an offensive slot. Because again, you get someone up in the front line who's just getting swarmed by commons, you just make sure that they're fine, and everybody starts focusing the specials, and then you wipe out the commons later, or they're a melee just taking care of that, or God forbid, they're a pyro in their own Molotov just hucking it down at their feet, right? Like, you can be immune to fire with this, you can theoretically be immune to acid with this, you can theoretically be immune to breaker swarms with this, depending on how high it gets up, right? You could maybe even tank a meatball from an ogre. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but just shooting it out of the air. There's a number of applications here that is incredibly dangerous. So if you get like a whole speedrun team and everybody stays, I'm guessing, taken by teammates within 25 meters. So as long as you stay within 25 meters, which is old Vanguard range, it's pretty generous, and you're able to keep this up, you almost can just speed through the map. Then you just need enough DPS to actually take down specials. You might also be saying, well, like 30 SMG ammo is a lot. It is. But if everybody's not having to deal with commons, or God forbid, one person runs Crippling Frequency, one person runs Expired T5, you have 5 people's worth of ammo. Ammo spawns in the map so long as it's not no hope. Everybody has like SMG ammo. You can get quite far with this. And it may even be like you don't even use this until, like, say, a running event like the bridge on the crossing or bad seeds, stuff like that. Or Road to Hell, right? The one just before Body Dump. Maybe even Body Dump. Like, being immune to crushers is another application of this that I forgot to mention. This is insane. Like, unless they fix the... I don't even know how they would do it. They would have to code this thing specifically. Because if Bodyguard still made you take trauma, it would be terrible. Because it would be no different from, you taking the damage in the first play. Like, it would save your life, but then, of course, the trauma would cut into your health and you would theoretically take damage anyways. Same thing with, like, Charisse plates. Those probably had to have this happen for the sake of their balance. So unless Crippling Frequency acts differently than the rest of that, and how Pep Talk works exactly right now, like, this thing's ridiculous. Anyways, I'm going to stop talking about Crippling Frequency, because it's just giving me conniptions. Fill 'em full of lead. This is honestly a very interesting card. What it does is, while shooting, gain 1% damage, 1% fire rate, and 5% swap speed every 0.25 seconds. Max count of buffs is 20. It specifies shooting, which is probably, fundamentally important, because I don't think melee needs any more buffs, personally. Like, obviously, people don't talk about melee a lot because pyro's better, but, you know, what's going to happen in a balance shakeup, right? Melee's still good, but pyro's just better. And theoretically, move speed while firing works on melee, so it'll be interesting to see if this actually does port over to there, because if that's the case, this is another 20% damage to 20% attack speed and some swap speed for melee. And that's like a shoe-in, right? Like, everybody's going to use that. So I think the while shooting is intentional, and it's there to sort of give us an idea of what it's supposed to be doing. But up to 20 stacks, as long as you're firing consistently, you will gain 1% damage, which generally 1% damage means that it's multiplicative. So this gets up to like overprotective, if you will, or up to near glass cannon. And all it counts is bullets, is the cost. And you have to ramp up, right? So it's kind of like a more volatile confident killer, honestly. You get 1% fire rate. Depending on the gun in particular, this may or may not be important. And then, of course, 5% swap speed. So what this is honestly looking to me for, in my theory, is I did a lot of work on chambered weapons and how reload speed affects them. And how it works is you have fire frames, or frames that count as while firing, which is where you get stuff like Hellfire and stuff like that. You can sprint out of it with running gun. Then you have chamber frames, which is affected by reload speed. And then you have like some rest frames at the end, which may honestly be due to the old 2-frame bug. But even if we negate that, I believe there is like an extra like little fire delay, if you will, on top of it. So reload speed affects the chamber frames, and fire rate affects the fire frames. So if you're doing like some sort of like either shotgun or maybe even a Phoenix or a Barrett build, you could theoretically have a 2-in-1 build where you have like say an RPK or a M249 with Shredder, and you're drilling into a boss. You get your max stacks here, and then you swap over real fast, and then just start drilling in with your other weapon. And it could get some ridiculous like DPS, especially because you're also getting this 1% damage on top of it and the increased fire rate. Is that the best use of this? I'm not entirely sure, but I think that 2-in-1 is definitely a good thing for this. And I think that it's going to be wasted on a lot of things that people are immediately going to come to mind, right? Like they're going to look at the vector and be like, well, I'm shooting a lot, so increased fire rate is going to help my DPS, not so much because your fire frames are less, and on top of that, you have to actually be shooting, not reloading. So Tech 9 isn't very good with this, Vector isn't very good with this. The Uzi actually has around the same fire rate as the Vector, but it actually has a magazine, so could potentially work, actually. Um, what's another one? Like, I think AA-12 might actually be able to make this work. But, yeah, this one's interesting. A lot of people have their eye on this, and it's going to be really exciting to see what people come up with this. Last one, experimental stun gun. Again, it's using sniper ammo, which seems pretty free to me. It's using the quick slot, though. And what this one does is activate your quick slot gadget to enhance bash with a 5-meter stun. Refreshes after 10 seconds and is removed by receiving damage. Now, so immediately what this looks like is this is obviously experimental stun gun. It's unlimited stun guns. And a lot of people are going to KEKW on that. But one thing to note is that using stun guns offensively is pretty damn good. The problem is that you have things like server desync, which cause you to miss a lot. And the hitbox on stun guns is pretty shit. If something's not standing still, you're probably maybe even still going to miss it. So it makes it hard to use them. But what this is here is using your quick slot for basically unlimited stun guns. Or at least 5 with your normal like ammo capacity. and it's in a 5 meter radius, which is much larger than the legendary defib, and that can be utilized to some effect by itself. One thing I want to note, as everybody probably already knows, is that Bash has a much better hitbox than a stun gun. Honestly, it's pretty strong, and it says stun, not it doesn't say stumble. So it's actually a significant duration. So then the question is how long is the stun? And I don't know, are you really willing to get rid of your quick slot for unlimited stun guns? I'd say maybe. Like it could free up some flashes, but flashes also give bonus damage, so maybe not. It could theoretically save your life, but then of course you have to like press your quick slot button and then bash, or just assume that it's always up. Another thing to note is if a bunch of commons are coming after you, and you punch the one in front and it stuns in a 5 meter radius, that's going to stun a lot of commons and reduce your damage by quite a bit. Again, is that worth your quick slots? And if the server desync decides that you just take damage anyways, then you don't do it. Honestly, this is probably like the biggest loser of the batch. I don't know, someone might be able to figure out how to use this. It's if someone does use it, it's going to be in a very niche situation. I could see it as you only have one flash for whatever reason. You'd be able to extend the stun on a boss. Oof, actually, could we hit an ogre with this? Because you can't hit them with a stun gun. That'd be, again, like a little funny thing. You'd be able to make sure that it doesn't escape. About it. Anyways, I'm sure that there's going to be a use for this, or like, again, we're just looking at it as written, and there could be extra little stuff in there, like as was with Sadists and other cards like that, right? Anyways, this has been, oh god, how long has it been? This has been an hour of me talking about 6 cards. Hopefully it was still entertaining for you, brought up some ideas. Maybe you have some things that I missed. Be sure to leave that down in the comments below. Maybe even some questions, feedback, and hopefully we can get some more spoilers coming out throughout the couple of weeks, and we'll be able to talk about those too. But until next time, I'll catch you guys around.